If you're an average 22-year-old today and you're kind of staring into the future and you're like, am I going to be able to like get married, have a family, have kids, own a home, send my kids to a good school, and then have good healthcare? Like,
on the one hand, we're on a very bad track for that. On the other hand, in some ways, an easy problem to solve. The solution is right in front of us.
Welcome back, everybody. We have a new topic today, which is the American dream. And I should give a couple of disclaimers right up front. So one is this is an extremely large topic, and it has many, many, many subtopics branch off from it. And when we solicited questions on X for this, and people submitted questions in many interesting categories, and so we'll get to some of it today, but a lot of it we won't get to. So it's a big and sprawling topic. We're going to try to at least do an introductory discussion around it. Maybe we'll do follow-ups if there's interest. The second thing is lots of people have lots of opinions about the shape of society and for sure the concept of the American dream. So we will be attempting to kind of explore our way through it. Hopefully maybe not making that many declaratory statements today, but at least trying to kind of outline some of the questions and issues. And then third, as we say, whenever we touch on anything political, like there are inevitably political dimensions to a topic like this. And our goal today will not be to take partisan political positions in any direction, but rather kind of as best we can to at least kind of frame the discussions and provide context. So please don't infer things into what we're saying that we don't explicitly say, because we're going to try genuinely to represent a pretty broad set of views. So with that, Ben, I thought maybe if it's helpful to you, and Ben pointed out right before we started that actually Ben and I have actually not explicitly talked about this topic. So this is one where we may be learning something about each other's points of view, which after 30 years of partnership / marriage, will be a new experience for us. So we will we will see what pops out. So I thought maybe I could start by describing kind of what I think the American dream is, and then you can respond and either agree or argue or provide your own. So I think basically there's two parts to it. So I think part one is what you might call the material part, or the sort of standard of living part, or the sort of the sort of nuts and bolts of what it means to live a good, productive life. And basically, I think that version of the American dream, I think has hung on a bunch of things, but like there's three big material things for sure. So one is to be able to own your own home. Right, which is by the way, a very old and primal concept, right? Like, I own my home. I am rooted to the land. I am not transient, right? I am. Originally, citizenry was based on land ownership. Like, I am a citizen. I own land. I am permanent. This is my place. The people around me are my people. They also own land. My family owns land. I can leave my land to my kids. They will have the option to live in the same land, as will their kids. As will their kids. And then my home is my castle. Nobody can take it away from me. I have protections inside it, and this is why, issues in American jurisprudence, like, unreasonable search and seizure, in America, at least in theory, the cops can't just like barge into your home and do whatever they want. Like, there's very explicit protections. And so this sort of very fundamental rooted kind of view of home and house, which is of course deeply connected to family. So that's one. Second is education. Especially in the last 100 years, the idea that my kids are going to be able to have an educational experience that's superior to mine. They're going to be able to learn more, have more advanced skills, than I had, and then they'll be able to then live more prosperous lives, and do kind of higher levels of work, and sort of climb the economic ladder. On the other side of that, and that's a big push. That's more recent, I think, and so that's a push that was really kicked in the early 1900s, in the way that we think about education today. Before the 1900s, education was a little bit more of an aristocratic concept, a little bit more of a rarefied elite concept, and it really got generalized out to all of American society in the early 1900s. And so that's the sort of ethos that we have today. And then third is healthcare, and this, maybe was not. This is another one where its importance has certainly risen dramatically, even in the last 80 years. But the idea that look, like, I'm going to get sick, my kids are going to get sick, my spouse is going to get sick, my parents are going to get sick, and like they're going to get taken care of, and there's going to be a healthcare system there that's able to bring the best of Western medicine and science and technology to bear. And they're going to get the best possible care. They're going to live as long as possible. They're going to be as healthy, for as long as possible for how long they live. Ben, I know you've thought about this a fair amount, so I'm sure we'll come back to that, kind of that topic. But and again, the American dream, like it really, if you look at the American medical system, like it's distinguished by the amount of money that goes into care in the last year of life, which is not the case in many other societies. And I think there's something in there about healthcare being tied to the American dream, where it's like you basically have the right. You should expect the fact that basically the medical system will do everything necessary to give you not just another 10 years of life, but another year of life, another month of life, another day of life. And that's sort of deeply embedded in the ethos. And so I think it's like those three. Home, education, healthcare. And then I think that so that's the tangible part. And then I think there's an intangible part, which you could use words like aspiration or self-actualization or self-realization or reaching one's full potential, which is basically, sort of achieving greatness, right? Like, becoming more than you are. And what I think is interesting about that one is that one is scalable. It's all the way down to the level of the individual, being able to become a better version of themselves, and being in a country and in a place and a time where they're able to do that. But it's also for your family and for your kids to be able to do that. And then Edmund Burke had this famous concept he called the little platoons, which is basically like the small scale communities, right? Small scale social organizations. So I can also have an aspiration for my neighborhood. I can have an aspiration for my town. I can have an aspiration for my city. I can have an aspiration for my state, and then the full form of that is I can have an aspiration for my country, and for America. And that there's a sense of we'll call it progress, but progress beyond just material progress, like moral progress, progress and purpose, progress in like it's maybe self-actualization would be the modern term, but like the progress in becoming something great. And that I'm going to be able to do that, but also I'm going to be part of larger efforts to do that at larger and larger levels of scale. And of course, America has a long history of sort of community volunteerism. One of the things that really jumps out in American history is how many volunteer associations there have been along the way, and a lot of those have been small scale. And then these kind of organized efforts, that were much more common in the 20th century, but like Lions Club and Elks Club, these kind of local efforts. And then, obviously larger scale volunteer efforts, religious institutions that seek to have have a big charitable component to help people, or other efforts to build bigger and better things within society, and make society better in the process. So let's call that the sort of aspirational psychological component to it. So let me stop there, and Ben, see what you think, and agree, disagree, or have totally different views.
So I agree. I think there's some incompleteness that let me talk about a little bit. I would say, interestingly, on the kind of economic side, housing is this very ancient idea. Goes back and this is our land, all the way back to the promised land and so forth, which is causing issues now. But I would say healthcare and education are a lot of function of the Industrial Revolution, and I think that'll come into play a lot in our discussion, in that the Industrial Revolution kind of created the need for everybody to have some kind of higher level of education, or there was some like outcome for being more educated, because there were more things to do than just farming. And then similarly, healthcare of a higher level was all of a sudden possible, and that was also an Industrial Revolution output. And interestingly, the Industrial Revolution also caused the creation of a much, much larger government, which in turn then regulated those fields and has kind of stalled out in some ways the American dream in those dimensions. So that's just kind of a really interesting aspect that those things connected. The other thing that I think you left out is I always thought of there being a very specific cultural aspect to the American dream, and maybe this isn't the American dream, but I always thought there was this idea of God, family, work, which was very American in nature, and in that order, you have to, first comes God, then comes family, then comes work, and that was kind of the ethical, cultural backbone that kind of the whole thing rode on. So So those would be the things that I would add.
Got it. Okay, let's touch on each of those. So you said housing and agents idea. So yeah, talk a little bit about the Promised Land. It's more in your cultural background than mine. So tell me about kind of how you think about that, and then how much of that kind of got transplanted into the American ethos, over the centuries.
Yeah. I'm not sure. Like it's really interesting. So in Judaism, God sort of promises Israel to the Jews. They're the chosen people, and they are promised this land. And in particular, the kind of most famous story about it, of course, is when the Jews are slaves in Egypt, and then once they can free themselves, then eventually they're going to get to, the Promised Land. They'll get back home. And I think it's a very important kind of concept in the psyche of America, or it's translated into that, in that home and freedom are highly connected. And then, you could also overlay American slavery on top of that and see where, that's been such a kind of core contradiction in America, is that the whole thing about home is free. Those are inseparable to me. And I think that's very, very related to the kind of original Jewish experience and kind of getting out of Egypt. And so yeah, I mean, I think that's it's really a fundamental connection with those two concepts.
So home, if I understand properly, so home is where you're free.
Yeah.
You are free at home.
And you have a right to that home. You have this is an inalienable right? The original inalienable right was to the pursuit of property, right? Not the pursuit of happiness. And that just sounded a little too capitalistic. But I think property is more accurate because it's an expression of freedom. Like, this is going to be mine. Like, the whole society, whatever, but this part is mine. And I think that, the Promised Land, this is what I'm on. This is my right.
Yeah, no, there's a little bit of a question here would be a little bit of like how much of this is pre-modern, how much of this is ancient and how much of this is new in the form of America, or how we kind of, think about or rethink America over the years, over the decades. So, this land is mine because God gave it to me, and specifically they gave it to my religion, my ethnicity, my people, my tribe. Like that's a pre-modern, I think you'd agree, that's a pre-modern worldview.
Oh yeah.
Like that's deep and primal.
The kind of Greece circa, I guess, 1500 BC, one of the first concepts of that society was the home and the fire. And so it's a pretty old idea. Once you kind of get into like where, the land, I imagine it goes back to the beginning of agriculture when that concept must have emerged.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's right. A good point. So there were basically in prehistory there were basically two kinds of societies. There were hunter-gatherer. There were sort of foraging, or there were roaming societies. So it was sort of classic hunter-gatherer, and they did not have a permanent attachment to any piece of land because they would be moving around in search of more food or better conditions or whatever. And so kind of land like tribal land boundaries were very porous and would shift a lot if they even existed at all. And then there was the agricultural societies was no, like we're here and we're going to stay. And then land ownership became very important because you're putting all the effort and resources into planting, something that won't, harvest out for another year. Right. Like you better not have it taken. You better not move somewhere else. Like while that's happening. Yeah. And so that was sort of the original creation of this sort of sense of rootedness. Is that, I mean, I think that matches your, that's kind of where you're coming from.
Absolutely. And kind of, and that, kind of went, monotheism emerged after agriculture, but for sure the kind of monotheistic view, and I guess actually the polytheistic view also, God, land is a God granted right, in ancient society. And I think that at least that feeling kind of went all the way through the Declaration of Independence, for sure. And is still with us now.
No, as you said, there's a contradiction at the heart of America, though, which is like we have that concept, but obviously, like that concept historically, like on a timeless basis, historically, that concept was very tied to the concept of a tribe or an ethnicity or a religion.
Yeah.
And in fact, and most ancient peoples who had that point of view didn't even differentiate between, religion, ethnicity, place, peoplehood. It was all a unified idea.
Yeah, and look, it's a unified idea in the biggest conflict in the world right now with Israel and Palestine. Right, this is the argument.
Right, exactly, and so,
and it's a tricky one, right? Because who was there first, and then, and then of course the whole thing was colonized by the British Empire, and then redivided up, and the British are way out by now, but
America,
interesting thing.
See if you agree with this. So America inherited that idea and put it in the founding documents, but at the same time, of course, I think the definition of America and the American dream is it's not a specific ethnicity, it's not a specific religion. You do not have to be, you do not have to be Anglo-Saxon, you do not have to be Protestant Christian, you do not have to be this, you don't have to be that. You can become American aspirationally, and you can become an American citizen, and you can become an American landowner, and you can vote in America without any of those historical, tribal, religious, ethnic binds, and in fact, you are expected to do so. When you become American, you are expected to leave those other historical affiliations behind, and then you become a full-fledged citizen. You can be a landowner, you can be a voter, and you can be everything else that comes with this for a sort of sense of deep-rootedness. And as you said, the execution on this was obviously not perfect, as shown by the fact that we inherited a lot of European aristocratic kind of social orders and structures and land ownership at the very beginning, and then there was obviously the long struggle for kind of for Black freedom, and then ultimately being able to actually sort of deliver on that on the dream that was in the founding documents.
Yeah.
And of course, there are arguments raging today as to whether we've reached that. But in any event, like we're a lot closer to that than we were 200 years ago, and we're a lot closer to that than I think any other society has been. So anyway, how do you, maybe talk a little bit about that.
So I actually think that, in some ways, that's probably the unique part, so if you look at humanity as a whole, like there's a lot of pieces that you could get anywhere, but the thing that had been, up to very recently, or had been very unique and kind of what was achieved here in America is that anybody and everybody could participate in the dream. We often talk about this, anybody can become an American, like not anybody can become Chinese, not anybody can become Swedish, not anybody can become French. And that's been a huge, powerful thing. And that what that's meant is kind of, you have a first class right to the American dream. And look, I do think, I think you're right, that it's extended to everyone, including immigrants, including people who are descendants of slaves. And that's, kind of is remarkable just in terms of humanity, like maybe not in terms of, some platonic ideal of fairness, but like America is definitely ahead on that in my experience. And actually, interestingly, I'm very good friends with Quincy Jones's son, QD3, and he grew up in Sweden. And he's a world traveler, and he just got back from Sweden. And I said, what was it like, and so forth. He said, the biggest thing was when I got back to America, even with all our problems, it was like shocking how much more equal and first class it was across race than it was in anywhere that I've been. And I think I really agree with that. And I think, it's kind of one of the nastier parts about the kind of new idea that we need to redivide into our tribes and our races and, announce your race at meetings, along with your gender and your pronouns and everything else. So I do think that's an important, maybe the most American aspect of it.
Yeah. I don't know, you probably have this experience if you have friends who come from other places and they move here and then they go through the citizenship process.
Yeah.
They become American citizens.
Yeah. Our friend Adam Newman just went through it. Yeah.
And they you probably had the same experience I have, which is people who come through that come out the other side just like, I don't even know how to express it. They've had like an almost genuine religious experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
As part of joining the American community.
Well, because, and I think it's because it's like, oh, I really am an American.
Right.
That really happened, and then I'm experiencing it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't convert to another nationality in the same way, I don't think. I mean, it is, well, it's interesting. I mean, Singapore, that was also Lee Kuan Yew's dream. It was to kind of replicate that idea in Singapore. And I think they've done a reasonably good job, although I don't know enough about Singaporean culture to know for sure. But it's certainly invented in America, this concept.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Okay, and then related to that is your point on the cultural aspect, and so as you said, sort of God, family, work, and so there's a couple things that we could talk about that. So one is just God, family, work. Like there's a fair amount of Protestant work ethic in there, so we could talk about, or maybe
Protestant. I think let's
talk about that.
Yeah, the whole Protestant thing is I think very, very central to the American dream in many in how America has worked it's really central. I mean, it's very much on my mind because and let me make a disclaimer first. I'm not responsible for my father. So anybody wants to attack me over anything he wrote or said, please refrain, because I am not responsible. But he just wrote a book on this topic, and it's a very
just describe quickly who your father is, and then what the book is.
Yeah, so my father is I would just call him a kind of political pundit, rabble rouser on the right. He prior was very much on the left, so he's kind of crossed the political spectrum over many, many years. But anyhow, he wrote a book called America Betrayed. And the basic concept of it, I think, is relevant because it is kind of intersects with the whole idea of the American dream, which is the concept of the book is, it starts with Martin Luther, of course, the great Protestant. And he argues that Martin Luther, what he rebelled against was the Catholic Church the leaders of the Catholic Church had put themselves above God. So, it was no longer, God, family, or God, family, work. It was, church, God, family, et cetera. And, one of the most stark ways they did this was this thing called the indulgences. And for those of you who don't know what that was, it was this very interesting tax where you could break the laws of God as long as you paid the church a fee. So, you could have sex with prostitutes or steal or just do get drunk, all these kinds of things. And you just pay the church and it was all fine. So, he thought that was horrible because, here these guys are, man should not be above God. This kind of Lutheran ethic kind of was part of the creation of America, in that, we say, we hold these rights, we hold these truths to be self-evident. What does that mean? Well, it means they came from God, right? Like these are not our rules. These are not man's rules. These are God's rules. And so when we say we're a nation of laws and we have rule of law, what we mean is there's certain rights and certain things that are above man and that apply to everybody, and everybody has this right, and it's given by God, and all men are created equal, and all this kind of thing. And so that, I think, is a huge part of the American dream, is that when I'm in America, I have my God-given rights. That's a very American concept. And I think it's, one of the things that, at least you and I worry is eroding now, but that's definitely a Protestant idea, that no man is above God, no man is above the law, I think, in our context.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then, that famously, we should describe also so then there's this idea of the Protestant work ethic. And this was sort of the Max Weber, the sort of one of the early sociologists, basically articulated this. And he basically said there's something in Protestantism that basically leads to, let's stereotype it. It leads to an extreme deferral of gratification. It leads to an extreme, very what they call, I think it's called very high time preference. It leads to like an enormous focus on investing and saving and producing and working hard today for an economic payoff that may come, years or decades in the future, or actually you may never experience it. Maybe your children or grandchildren that experience it. There's a version of it that's like, extreme and like self-denying, where like as you get kind of closer to like outright Calvinism, where just, you were just like, nobody's supposed to have any fun and everybody's supposed to work all the time. But there's also just this general idea of like, it's sort of also like, self-improvement, self-betterment. I'm going to just, pour enormous amounts of effort into becoming a better version of myself and then by the way, to gather material resources for myself and my family and my community. And that got, I bring that up because, as you said, sort of God, family, work, like the word work in there, like that's not,
yeah, it's not an accident.
Yeah, like that's not what I just described is not the norm in terms of historical societies. Like that in the form that we understand it today is relatively new.
Yeah,
and it's not the norm, across the world today. It's concentrated much more in some countries than others. And so, yeah, would you also connect that idea to the arc that you were describing?
Yeah, no, definitely, I think so. And like a lot of it came from, because it derived from this kind of rebellion against the Catholic Church, which had become, and the Catholic Church had become kind of all the things that weren't that. It wasn't about God. It was corrupt. It was just stealing the money from the people who were working. And then of course the family part, you didn't really have to care about your family as long as you paid the tax. And so it was all those things. And it's like, wow, you guys are not only like wrecking society, you're wrecking the kind of fabric, the culture, what's true, what's right. And so I think with Protestantism, you kind of rebuilt all those things. And you said, no, like God's on top and then family. And you take that seriously because God told you to. And then, and then the only thing else is work, like you're contributing, you're not taking. And look, I think that, and the reason I brought it up is I think it's so much the culture of the American dream, like the right was this right to freedom and getting all this good stuff, but the responsibility was God, family, work. That's what you were asked of. And I think that, and the reason I wanted to put it in is because, when you start to say, well, like what's happened to all the goodies that we're not getting anymore? Like, well, what happened to you doing your job? And a lot of that is like the culture has moved away from that. Obviously, it's moved away from religion in general.
Right. So then let's contrast that, and we'll close out this section. Let's contrast that to sort of the more kind of the more historical tribal mentality, which dominated again most of history, and then it still is very common throughout the rest of the world. In which sort of encapsulated by the Bedouin expression, me against my brother, me and my brother against my cousin, me, my brother, and my cousin against the world.
Yeah.
So
that I think is consistent across tribalism, by the way, and kin-based culture is, as it's referred to in The Weirdest People in the World, which is a great book, which we haven't talked about in a while, but worth reading for everyone. But that is really a cultural consistency in tribalism.
Right. And so it's this tribal societies, it's a series of concentric circles working their way out from the individual to the family, to the extended family, to the tribe, and then out to, the people, and then at war, with, either figuratively or literally at war with other peoples. So would you contrast and compare, like how would you contrast and compare that traditional model of tribalism with the God, family, work hierarchy?
Well, I think they're not quite the opposite, but they couldn't be more different. And I think that, and let me go back to, so there's this outstanding book called The Weirdest People in the World that actually goes through and studies the differences between this monogamous marriage, God, family, work, Protestant ethic sort of society that grew up in the West with the kind of general, more natural, more kind of, original man, tribalism, kin-based culture, polygamy, cousin marriage, all that kind of thing, right? Like those are the kind of two core, I think, societal constructs.
If I could, I think it's the case that a lot of people in societies like ours really have a hard time appreciating what cousin marriage means because we don't experience it. But in more traditional societies, it is the norm, and it leads to very different social organization.
Right. It wasn't just cousin marriage was allowed. That's generally what you did. You married your cousin because of what you said, right? Like you're only trusting the family, and so naturally you're going to marry your cousin. And that has other issues, which but the really interesting thing is when you have those two different cultures, the actual personal psychology of every individual turns out to be very, very different depending on whether you're in this kind of God, family, work culture, or if you're in a tribal culture. And in particular, there's not inalienable rights in tribal culture. It depends on who you are, very much. If you're my brother and you murder somebody, that's fine, as long as it's not in the family. And it really is fine. We can judge it however, but like for them, it's fine. In a kind of our society, like that's murder. Like, what are you talking about? You kill somebody, like that's not okay. And so this is, and I think, you can kind of see some of that tribalism coming back in America where people like, well, it's kind of a race. Well, we see it a lot right now in the Israel-Palestinian conflict where I think there's a certain set of people that say, oh, October 7th was a horrible event and da-da-da-da. And then there's another set of people say, no, it doesn't count because they weren't killing oppressed peoples, they were killing oppressors. So like, that's fine, murder's fine, rape is fine, all that kind of thing. And that kind of harkens back to this kin-based culture versus, Western culture idea.
Right. Okay, so then let's talk about what's gone wrong. So what are the pressures on this historical concept of the American dream? And again, this is something where a lot of people have a lot of thoughts. But let me provide Ben an outline for what I think has gone wrong, and you can kind of respond to it. So let me go back to my part one of my two-part thing, which is the material component, the sort of standard of living component. And so, and there's a slide, I'm not going to throw it up while we're talking, but we'll, in the edit for the podcast, we'll put it up so people will see it. There's a graph that I'll be referring to. This is sometimes called the most important chart in the world by Mark Perry, who tracks it. And then I think that may actually be true. It's certainly
your favorite chart.
It is certainly my favorite chart. And it routinely blows people's minds when they see it, because they really experience it in their daily lives, but they really don't understand the impact of what's happening and the trajectory of it all if they don't see it in chart form. And so basically what happens is you can basically break the sort of modern Western economy like the US into basically two categories of things that people buy. And sometimes I call these the fast categories and the slow categories. And so, and the fast categories basically are the ones that are characterized by extremely rapid technological innovation. And then they're characterized by falling prices. And basically this is sort of everything that you buy that gets cheaper and better every year. And this is actually a lot of what people buy. And I'm not, obviously inflation, people have experienced, rising prices generally with inflation in the last 3 years. I'm going to set that aside for the moment. Assume that's not a permanent state of affairs now, but like generally over the last, 40 years, most of the things in the sort of bottom half of this chart are things where the prices have fallen. And look, this is, very easy examples of this. This is, automobiles, this is consumer electronics. TV sets is maybe the thing where you see this the most vividly, which is you can just buy an incredibly large, incredibly high resolution TV set today for a fraction of the cost, from 10 years ago. Many areas of technology, software, toys, games, many forms of media, music costs a fraction of what it used to. Movies cost a fraction of what they used to. You buy, you for $10 a month on Netflix, you're getting access to 20,000 movies like that. That's just that's a pricing model that was just inconceivable 20 years ago. And so basically you have basically sectors. So rapid technological change, falling prices, and then one other thing I'll come back to in a second, which is relatively unregulated. So the government is not that involved in those sectors. They're almost entirely private sector based. And then you've got sectors that sort of show the opposite thing happening that turn out to be the American dream sectors. And the three big sectors that have the opposite, as I sometimes call the slow sectors, these are the sectors with rapidly rising prices and with relatively low or even possibly negative technological development. And then heavy government involvement, which I'll talk about. Basically, it's the three sectors of the American dream. So it's housing, it's education, and it's healthcare, and specifically in the form of buying houses or renting. On the one hand, education, sending your kids to school. And of course, if you send your kids to government K through 12, you pay for that as a taxpayer. You see the rising prices as a taxpayer. But if the minute you go to college, you see it in terms of tuition, or private schools, you see it in tuition. And then in healthcare, obviously, everybody experiences just this massive inflation of healthcare prices. It's always one of the main political issues these days. And basically, what the chart shows is that housing, education, healthcare as sectors are rising much faster than the rate of inflation. And so, and again, the minute people see this chart, they're just like, oh, of course, that's what's happening. I cannot believe how much I have to pay for a house in a good location. I can't believe how much I have to pay, to send my kid to school, and I cannot believe, the medical bills. And this is getting extreme, right? Like, there are houses, tear down houses in like the most attractive places in the country. Like tear down houses are like $3 to $5 million. I mean, this is like really extreme, and on that side. And then on the healthcare side, healthcare is like a sixth of the American economy, on its way to a fifth, on its way to a half.
Yep. Yeah, well, and it's so scary that if you don't have insurance, like forget about it, or like you wouldn't do any procedure if you had to pay for it. Most
immediately
people,
yeah. Your pocketbook would vaporize on impact with the system. Yeah. You just get like completely obliterated on the first day. Yeah. You just get your savings obliterated. So anyway, so basically the economy is bifurcated between these two categories, and they're just gapping way apart. And then the trends that are causing them to gap apart are getting worse, not better. Like there's basically no motion underway to try to correct for any of this. And in fact, what's happening is why are the prices showing so much dispersion? It's basically a political phenomenon, which is you as an American taxpayer citizen experience these rapidly rising prices of the three components of the American dream: housing, education, healthcare. You as an American voter are very upset by this, and so politicians, to get your vote, they promise to subsidize, and so they promise mortgage subsidies or rental subsidies or rent control, right? They promise
loan forgiveness.
Student loans. So first they give you student loans at below market prices, and then the second thing they do is forgive them. Right, and then obviously the various forms of government, health insurance, everything from Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, and all the other medical programs. And so they're all characterized by massive government subsidy, and then specifically massive government subsidy into highly regulated. These are all three of these are highly regulated industries, and the consequence of the high regulation, among other things, is restricted supply.
Right.
And so why does a tear down house in Palo Alto cost $3 to $5 million? Is because like you cannot get like legal approval to build a new, to allocate land that's not already zoned for housing. You can't to build more house. You cannot do it.
Yeah, it's a small economic lesson for our listeners. Massively subsidized demand, restricted supply guarantees high prices.
Guarantees prices to the moon. Like guarantee if you subsidize, to your point, if you subsidize prices indefinitely, and if you restrict demand, and if you subsidize demand indefinitely and you restrict supply indefinitely, prices can go to infinity.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's no upper bound.
And they are.
And they are, exactly. They 100% are. And we'll just take college as an example, just because it's been in the press so much recently. Look, a 4-year degree at a private college in America, the tuition room and board cost now is pressing up against $400,000. If current trends continue, which I expect they will, that's going to cross $1 million, and not that many years in the future. These are like compounding at like 15% a year. And so you're going to be able to buy a college education for your kids for $1 million and a flat screen TV that covers your, the entire wall of your house for $100. Like that's really bad. Like that's a really, really bad. One is just the divergence is really bad, but the other is like, look, if you were like king and designing this, you'd want it to be the other way around, right? Like you'd want which is more important, education of the TV set. Like you'd want to go the other way around, and like we are headed prices for the three components of the American dream are headed to the moon. And there's a term sometimes that gets used as the doom loop, which is like, why is this just going to continue? It's a doom loop, which is, well, the more prices rise, the more politicians are going to subsidize demand, which is going to cause prices to rise, which is going to cause politicians to subsidize more demand.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the horrible, hilarious thing about education right now is, well, why did tuition go out of the stratosphere? Well, because we guaranteed everybody a student loan. And so immediately the universities, which are an oligopoly, said, oh, we can raise prices as much as we want because they're going to get the money. And then we have the student loan crisis. And so what do? Do we solve the problem that education is not worth the money? No, we just subsidize it more by forgiving student loans, what will that do? Well, that will, further subsidize demand and encourage the universities to raise prices even more. And what are they spending the money on? Well, one administrator per student, like literally in the age of AI, when you probably don't need any administrators. So it's that ridiculous. It's systemic incentives are causing the issue, kind of in short.
I'd even add one thing that's maybe even going to make it even worse, which is which are the loans that get, now they're doing student loan forgiveness, which are the loans that get forgiven? It's for the degrees that pay off. It's for the degrees that pay off less, right?
Yeah,
kind of by definition.
Right. It's the degrees that are most worthless, right?
The most worthless. But if those are the ones getting subsidized, guess what's going to happen on the demand side, right? It's going to drive.
Exactly.
Now
everybody wants to go to art school.
Right, exactly, because it's going to be free, right? Because they're going to forgive everything. So like we're on a tread, and then of course, who pays? The taxpayer pay. Ultimately, you as consumers, kind of, eat it when you get when you have to buy a house. But like for education, and healthcare, it's then kind of saturated across the tax base. And if you make any money, if you have a paycheck of any kind, you just get a bigger and bigger chunk taken out of it. And so there's this sort of giant collective action problem that's kind of embedded in it. But anyway, the result of this is basically the prices of the three key material components of the American dream are headed. They're basically unattainable. Like if you're an average 22-year-old today and you're kind of staring into the future and you're like, am I going to be able to like get married, have a family, have kids, own a home, send my kids to a good school, and then have good healthcare? Like
we're not on a good, on the one hand, we're on a very bad track for that. On the other hand, it's in some ways an easy problem to solve because, the solution is right in front of us, which is
let's talk. What's the solution?
Stop subsidizing demand and deregulate supply. And I think that you'd see, for sure in education, if you deregulated supply, costs would go way down, I think, because, particularly this is one where technology really could change things incredibly fast because, you've got, you have AI tutors, instructors, et cetera, that are going to be unbelievable, better than kind of any teacher. And then you have, kind of remote capability. So you don't have to live, on campus in a fancy place and this and that. Like maybe you can do that, or maybe you can do it in a more kind of structured way and get people together on occasion or so forth. So you could offer a higher quality education than Harvard, no doubt, a technologically enabled education for, a few $1,000s a year, I think. I think that's eminently possible. In terms of what it actually costs to deliver such a thing. And then, and all you'd have to do to get that would be to, not have the current accreditation process for universities. And I think that's, kind of true in K through 12 as well. And then you wouldn't have to have these massive loans for these schools if there was an alternative.
Well, let me describe the accreditation process because you mentioned it, and it's really critical to how the current system works. So the way the current system works is basically colleges and universities in the U.S. have to be accredited. I'll describe why in a moment. Accredited means they need basically government approval, government sign off, except it's not really government sign off. It turns out it's something else. And so what happens is the U.S. Department of Education, which is a federal agency, they accredit accreditation agencies. And so if you go on their website, there's a long list of all these accreditation agencies that are these like separate, basically like nonprofit or things, these like NGO things that are basically, they have some name like the whatever, the Northeastern University Accreditation Council or something like that. They've always got some name like that. And there's some office in DC somewhere, and there's like 2 people sitting in it, and who knows. But like it's this thing. And then basically they accredit those accreditation agencies. Those accreditation agencies accredit the colleges and universities. Guess who, for those accreditation agencies, guess what they are composed of? They are composed of the incumbents. So the Northeast, College, whatever accreditation council is like literally its board of trustees is all of the top Northeastern, college universities in that area. And they decide whether a new college or university in that area gets accredited or not. And here's the kicker. If it doesn't get accredited, it has no access to federal funding. Which means it has no access to federal student loans. It has no access to federal anything.
Well, I think kind of even more importantly than that, it's not accredited. So the reason people go to school is so that they can get a job. And, if you have a school that's not accredited, is likely not recognized by employers. So that's a huge feature.
Right. Or even, horror of horrors, it may be a for-profit, which is of course the ultimate way that, you can't trust an education output.
Right.
If it's one of these dreaded for-profit colleges, universities, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So that's sort of but I mean, I want to go through that because I wanted to press on your point, which is like, okay, if you're going to launch into a new, like if you're going to try to do your thing, okay, we're going to do a better education than Harvard. We're going to do it at, $5,000 a year instead of, $80,000 a year. Okay. Like if you can't get accredited, which you probably can't, then like at that point then the students are out of pocket. Or their parents are out of pocket. And so you have to really make sure that there's some way, then you have then you actually have like direct consumer pay, which is not how the current system works. And so the bar is high that it actually has to be cheap enough. It has to be, well, number one, it either has to be cheap enough where you can actually have students and their parents pay for it out of pocket, or it has to be, I don't know, so overwhelmingly valuable that people would figure out a way to maybe go into debt, separately to be able to pay for it because the jobs they get on the other end would be so fantastic or something like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. But look, I actually think that's possible, as long as what would likely happen, the way things work now is the oligopoly would go to the government and say, shut that thing down, if it started to work. And that would be the danger.
Yeah. So anyway, this is the when we had our previous podcast series in universities, but like there is a very deep conversation to be had here on this front, to Ben's point, and then same thing on healthcare, and then same thing on housing. Yeah. By the way, housing is an interesting one where everything I just described for education basically is driven by top-down government policy, right? It's the federal government that's doing the accreditation and the funding. Housing actually weirdly has the same problem, but from an opposite government standpoint, which is it's local towns and cities that basically prohibit building.
Yeah.
Right. And in fact, people have proposed, the YIMBYs have proposed in some cases, you actually need the larger government entities like the states or the country as a whole to actually step in and actually prevent like local municipalities from having such restricted zoning.
Yep. Yeah. Well, no, for sure. And then there's also, I think there's some state level things. I don't know who requires the environmental study, but the environmental study turns out to be a real corruption in the sense that whether or not they're doing the study, whether or not they find anything, they're going to kind of slow down the project and potentially charge you a massive fee for whatever you're doing. And that's, at least my understanding from builders, that's why a lot of things don't get built.
Yeah. And some of that is federal for sure. NEPA is a federal law, so a lot of that's federal. Okay, and then I would say part two, if you kind of extrapolate from that, it's like, okay, then if those are like the economic explanations for what's happening to the American dream, then you go into part two, which is the aspirational part. And I think there's just like a straight up, part is just like there's just a straight up like can you aspire? Is it actually practical as a kid, coming out of high school or college right now to actually aspire to the American dream? Is it like actually economically practical? I think is one big question. But I think there's also another thing that's happening that's related to it, which is if you can't articulate and show people and have it be actually substantive that there is a path to be able to realize the American dream, then the politics in the country naturally have to go from positive sum growth orientation We're all in this together. We're all building something great. The sort of aspirational component that I talked about earlier, they kind of necessarily have to go to a zero-sum mentality.
Right. Divide up the fixed pie. Yeah.
Divide up the fixed pie. And then I think that's where, and I think this is something I'm convinced of at this point. I think that's where the sort of populism of our day on both the left and the right are actually coming from. I think that's actually the foundation for it. The foundation for it is basically people saying, like, look, we are not on a good path. There is not enough growth. There's not enough opportunity. And so as a consequence, if I'm on the right, I need to, think hard about, everything from, who should be a citizen and who shouldn't, and so forth and so on. If I'm on the left, I need to become, very focused on things like racial and ethnic divisions and which tribe and group that I'm in terms of apportioning resources. Right. And so you get this, and both of those are basically variations on zero-sum thinking. They're very focused on, who gets denied in order that I can benefit. And so if you wanted to generate pernicious zero-sum politics, you would do what we're doing economically.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, that's a happy idea. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think that I've been thinking about kind of with respect to that is, a lot of, other than housing, the rest of the kind of material components of the American dream were a function of industrialization. And, kind of industrialization ran its course, partly for technological reasons, but, partly for kind of regulatory reasons, where it just, you couldn't start. It's very much more difficult to start a new kind of industrial company than it was to start the Ford Motor Company, which was, when you read it, it's remarkable how easy it was to start a car company in those days, just like phenomenal. And we are kind of on the dawn of a new technological era, the information age, and we're kind of hitting, the information age is kind of hitting the same stride that I think the Industrial Revolution hit in the kind of 20s and 30s. It was a long growth period into that. The technology was kind of available long before that, but that's when it started to really get to everybody. And of course, also the regulation is just starting on it and so forth, and we'll see how that goes. But, I wonder if another kind of dream opens up and like, we're just like on the verge of it. And because it hasn't happened yet, we're like, it's never going to happen. But, one could certainly imagine just such radical changes in what's possible, kind of reigniting growth, aspiration, all these things. And, I think you mentioned the other day that Gen Z is making more than millennials, which is very interesting, because that hasn't, that's a reversal of trend. And, for the kids that grow up with, the Gen Z that grew up with smartphones and, mobile computing and all that, the next generation is going to grow up with full AI. Are their imaginations not going to want to reinvent everything about society, given that you have this abundance of intelligence running around? And will that not lead to more opportunity and so forth? And that's, I think it's an open question, but I wouldn't paint it quite as black, and I don't mean black in a racial sense, of course, quite as dark as you did.
Yeah. So, okay, well, let's talk about that. And actually, this is one of the questions we have actually from Aaron. What will the American dream look like in the next 100 years? And so, Ben, maybe give a longer articulation of like what does an information age American dream or an AI era American dream look like?
Yeah. So I think that, education, everybody has access to amazing education. Look, I'm getting educated right now using, tools like Meta AI and ChatGPT and so forth. Like anytime I want to learn something, I've literally just asked the AI a question. The other day, my friend Babyface was asking me about the value of music catalogs. And I just asked, AI to do a discounted cash flow analysis on the various catalogs and so forth. I didn't remember how to do that kind of thing. And I was just like, okay, if it's throwing off this much cash a year, and assume it does for 30 years with a terminal value of $50 million, but and boom. So I'm old and I'm still able to use it to great effect, which is quite amazing. It's freaking awesome. And imagine every child is growing up with this. They know they can just ask the machine anything and they'll get the answer. So anything you want to learn about, anything that you can dream of, anything that your imagination lets you, you're going to be able to learn. You'll be able to learn anything. And look, that wasn't, for you and me, we didn't have the internet. We had to go to school. I don't know why you have to go to school to learn anything, in 2030. That's not going to be true. So I think education's going to reemerge much better than it's ever been, much better than it ever was with the university system, and without getting, drinking yourself to death or the other kinds of things that go on at college. And so that's kind of, one aspect. And then I think on healthcare, similarly, there's a real opportunity to completely change healthcare with a combination of just amazing diagnostic capabilities, that can be done by yourself remotely and so forth. So you can always be checking on your health. You can get, real time, very intelligent, machines are far better at medical diagnosis already than humans. And so, something that used to be very, very complicated and expensive could get very, very good, very fast for people. And, yes, the latest medicines might be expensive, but, you won't need them as much because you'll at least have the opportunity to keep yourself in great health. And then, housing, we would have to certainly fix the government corruption, but we've seen, the kind of technologically the ability to 3D print the most gorgeous buildings in the world. And that'll be in full effect. So at least the construction costs, have the potential to fall dramatically. And so all of a sudden, one might be able to aspire to an amazing life with, not, that much, of course, to benefit from these things, you have to put in effort, you have to regain your work ethic and all these kinds of things. But I think culturally that would be very good. People would have more fulfilling lives. So I think there's an opportunity, despite what we've done to ourselves, to go back to an abundance mentality and get out of this kind of crazy zero-sum politics that we're in now. But, yes, I do agree that the reason it's Trump versus Biden is because we're completely zero-sum at this point.
Right. There's another technological revolution, of course, that's in the makings, at least, which is along the lines of what you're describing, which is robotics. And if general purpose robotics tips, which it looks like it might, there's looks promising right now. So one way to think about this is look, a lot of daily life is just dealing with all the stuff that you have to deal with in the house, and everything. It's cleaning clothes and cooking and washing dishes. It's all the stuff. And there's this famous expat lifestyle, right, where people live in a place with a much lower per capita GDP, and all of a sudden you have all these household employees, maids and cooks and everything that you can't afford, and there's digital vagabond people who have software jobs from Thailand or something, where they just have a totally different lifestyle. And then, of course, rich people in the U.S., have that lifestyle just by paying a lot of money, to have domestic employees. But if everybody has robotics, it may be that you have that experience. Basically, you get to a point where everybody basically has, mechanical, and then you assume these things get on sort of a Moore's law price curve. Everybody basically has the sort of material necessities of life, basically taken care of by robotics. And the dystopian view of that is the Wall-E view, which is okay. Then I can just sit, in my lounge chair and slurp on, soda and watch, and be in VR and zone out the whole day. Or it could be no, I actually have another, 3 hours a day to be productive. right? And then all of a sudden it means I have another 15 hours a day to be able to, succeed in my career, or, per week. And then I can actually self-actualize at a higher level, because I actually have a lot more freedom of time, to be able to actually go do things. And the long arc of technology in the household has been that arc. For example, the rise of women in the workplace over the last 80 years, which has been
the washing machine.
Yeah, the washing machine. Like, one of the reasons why the women in the workplace were much lower, in decades and centuries past, is because just like maintaining a house just sucked down all their time. And now it's just much more feasible to be able to have a job, because
doing laundry was almost like doing laundry by hand is nearly a full-time job. And then if you add to that cooking and cleaning and all these kinds of things, that is a full-time job, even for one family.
Yeah, and so we may be on the verge of a robotics revolution, such that the house, that the common person's house in 10 years, or certainly 20, 30 years, it's the Jetsons, right? Like, we might be on the verge of that. And on the one hand, it's like, that's kind of prosaic, which is like, okay, great, you've got like better, you've got a better washing machine or whatever. But on the other side of that is, no, you actually now everybody becomes liberated and free to be able to spend their time doing useful and productive things, or at least having the opportunity to spend their time doing useful and productive things.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And by the way, like, we do have, one of the things I've been kind of thinking about and kind of working on as part of my job is, America and most countries are, the governments are using Industrial Revolution technology, right? These paper forms, the way we vote, the way we kind of fund things, like it's all very in the Stone Age or in the Industrial Age. And, if governments were re-platformed onto information technology, and, we've seen some governments around the world do this, Estonia and so forth are kind of moving along. It does change the nature of government, the kind of size of government required, and, their ability to kind of get to conclusions on things fast. And, we have a company, donotpay.com, that kind of helps citizens work around, like it has the AI just deal with the bureaucracy for you. But if you AI'd the entire bureaucracy, then, maybe some of these things would start to resolve as well. Like it gets, when it's just a ton of humans doing stuff, like it's naturally corrupt. You want to build a house? Well, guess what? I'm in charge of the permit, and I need to eat too. Of course that's going to happen. But if these things become automated, then maybe things free up a bit.
Yeah. So where we're coming out is, sort of the opportunity, if you can punch through a lot of the historical technological limitations and a lot of the historical societal constructs that were built around the technological limitations of the industrial era, then all of a sudden you have the opportunity to kind of reformulate the idea of what the dream is, but also reformulate like each aspect of how to deliver it.
Yeah. No, I think that's the hopeful view, as opposed to the continuing death spiral that we seem to be in.
Good. Well, tell you what, we're at an hour. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground. We have a thousand questions that go into more detail on every aspect of this, but since we reached an optimistic note, maybe we tie this one off here.
Yeah, I think that's a good intro.
Yeah, and then if we get a good reaction to this, we can do subsequent episodes and we can dive into the individual components of this in more detail, right. and go in more of the questions. Sound good?
Perfect. Sounds perfect.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds great.